the third piece I want to read is just because the character, I've been reading from Joe's point of view simply because the language is a little more palatable to a mixed crowd. It's told from three persons' point of view, Joe, and then a street kid named Chris, and then one of the bad guys. And Chris is a very important character in the book. And in fact, it was difficult to keep him from taking over the book. A lot of the comments I've gotten from readers are that it is, while they care about Joe, it is Chris that really keeps the suspense up and makes them want to read to find out what's going to happen. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background about how I developed the story of Chris. First of all, the name of the character came from the Princeton Coffee House. Because when we were still meeting at Debbie's frame shop, there was a young man that came one night, and he said he was an artist, and he had black ringlets, and he was very personable, and his name was Christopher Robert Young. And I thought, what a great name for a character, and a graffiti artist character, because he could use C-R-Y as his tagline, cry. You know, he'd make a statement, and it would also be his name. So that is where the name came from it. And I actually started writing him before I met some of the kids on the street. But there were a couple of kids that I got to know really well when I was volunteering in Chicago, one of which in particular really influenced me when it comes to how this character thinks. And there are some scenes in here that reflect incidents that I had with this other kid, who happened to be named Chris, but that was just a coincidence kind of thing. And this Chris and his friend Anthony and I used to meet. The night ministry bus that I mentioned earlier would get over with at like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning sometimes, and the boys would meet me, and we would go to a nearby all-night restaurant, and I was doing tutoring with them because they were trying to get GED, and while I don't do math, I do English, and so I was kind of helping them with essay writing and things like that to try to get their GED. So I give credit to some of the kids in the front of the book, and Chris and Anthony in particular, I think, made a difference in how realistic I think the character of Chris is. To set this scene up, it's a little bit shorter than what I've read so far. It's kind of in the middle of a chapter. This is the scene where she saw the boy in the alley there, and she wants to talk to him to see if she can find out more information. She finds out that there's this guy named Jack who happens to know Chris, and makes arrangements with him to meet Chris by the planetarium. And this starts when they are at the planetarium waiting for Chris to show up. Someone was walking up the sidewalk, a young boy of about 15 or 16, but it wasn't Chris. This kid was African American, a set of headphones on under a Cubs cap. He was bopping toward them in time to the soundless music produced by an iPod, clipped to the sagging waistline of his oversized jeans. "Moon," Jack yelled. He waved at the boy. "Over here." The boy stopped, his face suspended mid-bop, his expression startled and wary until he saw who was calling him. He ran up to them. "Jack, man, you're still here, man. I told Chris you'd be long gone by now." He pronounced the words "long gone" like they had more than one O in them. Joe wondered how he had gotten the nickname of Moon. His face was round enough and smooth, like the surface of an uninhabited planet, and his skin dark as freshly turned topsoil. "You talked to Chris? Where is he? Is he okay?" Jack stepped forward like he wanted to grab Moon by the upper arms and shake answers out of him, but he dropped his arms and stepped back quickly. The third degree didn't bother Moon at all. He just grinned at Jack and reached up to pluck the earbuds out of his ears. "Relax, man. He's doing just fine. Didn't even look scared when the sirens came screaming up. You know him, Jack, man. He ain't scared of nothing." "Sirens?" Jack asked. "Chris got arrested?" "Not the cops, man. The ambulance. Somebody must have dialed 911 when he came staggering up looking like a raw piece of meat." Jack apparently had more patience than Joe. He didn't shake the boy or jump down his throat. He didn't even look exasperated as Moon slowly told them what happened, one backward piece by one backward piece. Finally, thanks to calm questions from Jack, the whole story came together. Chris had apparently walked up to a gathering of kids he knew, white as a sheet except for blood oozing from abrasions on his face. He fainted, Moon said, or stumbled when he reached them, and fell in a heap on the sidewalk. That must be when the suit from the arcade called emergency, see, Moon said. They don't want no one dying on them, man. Not good for business, you know what I'm saying? Before the ambulance arrived, Chris asked Moon to meet them and tell them what had happened. So I did, Moon finished with a grin, and I hopped my little black ass over here as quick as I could, even though I figured you'd be long gone by now. There was that long gone again. Neither Jack nor Joe commented on the fact that his little black ass, as he called it, hadn't been moving very quickly when they saw him. Joe, the keys. Jack held up his hand to catch them. I've got to see if he's all right. Get in, Moon. He was unlocking his door as he spoke. Moon backed up, hands held out in front of him. No way, man, not me, he said, shaking his head. You ain't getting me in no hospital, man, no way, nada. You see, Joe interpreted over the roof of her car for Jack, what he's saying here is that he doesn't want to go with us. Neither Jack nor Moon seemed to notice her sarcasm. That's right, Moon said, pointing at her with a wide sweep of his arm like he was chalking up a point for the smart lady. I've done my job, you got the message, now I'm out of here. So long, Jack man. He flipped them a wave of his pale, short-fingered palm and started back down the sidewalk. So you're coming with me? Jack asked unnecessarily as Joe slid into the passenger seat next to him. I'm a hard woman to get rid of sometimes, Joe said, and I want to talk to Chris, remember? Half the city's population seemed to fill the waiting room of Martha Washington Hospital's emergency care unit. Those who could sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs. The rest had to lean against the wall or each other. A bald man in a muscle t-shirt paced the length of the room with a blood-stained towel wrapped around one hairy forearm. He nearly tripped over an old woman who slumped snoring in her seat, careworn shoes thrust into the aisle. By the door, a child with glazed eyes and snot clotted beneath its nose rested his head on his mother's breast. Somewhere an irate husband demanded a doctor for his wife. Now, God damn it, he shouted, he'll see her now. 2 men in security jackets hurried toward the sound of his voice. Most, though, waited resignedly, staring at old magazines or a television bolted so high in one corner the sound didn't reach Joe where she waited while Jack talked to the receptionist. She could hear other sounds well enough, moaning, the constant wail of an exhausted child, incoherent mumbling. The smells invaded also, old urine like acrid ammonia, bad breath, dirty bodies, all mixed with the sickening antiseptic smell of disinfectant and bug spray. The silent revolution of red and blue lights from an ambulance unloading at the door colored the scene. Jack caught Joe's attention across the space between them, and she followed them to an area divided by a green curtain dangling from runners built into the ceiling. Chris sat at the edge of a narrow bed, shoulders slumped, his left arm in a sling and a white patch of gauze on one cheek. Swollen purple flesh had narrowed his left eye to a slit, but that didn't stop his brown eyes from lighting up when he saw Jack. Jack, great! Get me out of here, man. I think they called DCFS. He hopped to the floor, but Jack put one hand on his shoulder. Hold on, what about this? He pointed to the sling. Is it broken? Just sprained. They took an x-ray, stitched my face and my head, gave me a shot of something. Jack examined the clotted patch of hair at the back of Chris's head. I'm fine, Jack, really. I just don't want to get stuck in juvie, okay? So let's go. He wore the same t-shirt and jeans of earlier, but with paint smudges that had dried already. Now just hold on a sec. Jack grabbed Chris's good elbow as the boy made a move toward the exit. Chris turned. His pale face contrasted with the white bandage and purple swell of his eye. The fluorescent lighting made his pallor even more sickly, especially when framed with the tangle of dark curls. In a face that battered, it seemed impossible 2 eyes could still hold such expressiveness, such appeal. Jack, please, Chris started. You're not going with DCFS, Jack assured him. They let me sign you out on the condition I take you straight to the shelter so they can keep an eye on you tonight. You may have a concussion, Chris. That's not something to screw around with. The tension eased in Chris's shoulders, and he sagged a little, allowing Jack to take his arm again. He even leaned on the counselor a bit as they made their way to the car. His alert look around the parking lot made it clear he was still charged up from his experience. He breathed a sigh of relief when he settled in the passenger seat. There was a stuffed Garfield in the back seat, the kind usually gummed to an inside window. Joe picked it up as she slid inside. Stroking the soft fur soothed her somehow. As they left the parking garage, she opened her mouth to ask questions, but Jack beat her to it. "So," he asked, "what happened?" Chris flipped down the visor on the passenger side. In the mirror clipped to the back, he studied Joe's reflection. She could only see his one unswollen eye above the white bandage on his cheek. Jack glanced back at her, then looked over at Chris and said quietly, "She's okay." Chris pushed the visor back up. "It was cold, Jack. I know it was." His voice was so low Joe had to lean forward to hear him. "Cole?" Jack asked. "Sidney Cole. He works at Whiteside's." "He beat you up?" Jack asked. "Yeah," Chris said, "that too. But what I meant was, he killed her, Jack. He killed Lexi."